boys and girls, welcome to reading class. So today we're going to be talking about conflict, also known as struggle and problems. So you will need your textbook scans, pages 320 to 322, as well as your workbook scan, page 127. Looks like this has a giant shark in the front. And our textbook scan looks like this, right? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so like I said, conflicts are just problems. Now take a look at this image. Look at the soldier, the policeman, the firewoman, and the doctor. So as you know, problems are a part of everybody's lives. We all have problems. And, God actually allows these into our lives for a purpose. There's a reason. Now, look at these pictures and think to yourself, what kind of problems do you think that the people in these pictures face because of their jobs and responsibilities? What do you think? You can pause here or you can talk to me about it. Well, maybe you said something like, it's difficult to go to war, it's difficult to fight with fire, it's difficult, to police a city. All good answers. And how should Christians respond to problems in their lives? What is a good way for us to act when we feel like we have a big problem that we can't solve? I would say it's important to first and foremost trust Jesus and trust God and trust that He has a plan for everything and that He is in control. So basically today we are going to be reading and learning about how authors use problems as an important part of their stories. So I'm sure these books look familiar to you, kind of talk to me about what kind of problems arise in these two different books. So for example, in Harry Potter, the main conflict here is that Harry Potter needs to defeat Lord Voldemort. In Matilda, one of the main problems, the conflict is, Matilda has to deal with Mrs. Trunchbull. So what we're going to be reading about today, this is a quick outline that I made regarding our article today. There are different types of conflict. So the two main types are internal and external. We're going to be reading about what those mean. And some other types are main conflict and secondary conflicts. Let's go ahead and read. If you prefer to read alone, that's completely fine. Just you can skip ahead to the workbook page. Go ahead and complete the workbook page and then we can go over the answers together. Otherwise, let's read together and I'll stop once in a while to ask you some comprehension questions to see how we're doing catching up. And I would like you to either pause or just feel free to answer my questions. Pretend that we're actually in the classroom. All right, let's get started. Conflict in stories. A Spear for Omar has something in common with almost every story ever written. It has a main character who struggles for something and either wins or loses. What does Omar struggle against? First, he fights his own fear, then his brother's mocking or teasing, then the shark. And why does he struggle? He wants to prove himself worthy, not only to his father, but also to himself. A struggle almost always comes from a character's wanting something. Omar wants to be brave like his brother and father. He wants his brother to stop making fun of him. And he wants to rescue his brother Gomez from the shark. Okay, my question for you. What does almost every story have in common? Pause. So the answer is that almost every story has a main character who struggles for something and either wins or loses, right? Let's go on. Two types, internal and external conflicts. Struggles in stories are called conflicts. Sometimes a character has a conflict inside himself. Which of Omar's struggles are inside? What do you think, actually, before we read? Well, his struggle with his fear of drowning is clearly inside his own mind. He's not physically fighting it, right, with swords. Can you think of something that you wanted to do, but were afraid of doing? So again, pause here. Tell me some things that you were scared to do. Like the first time I had to ride a roller coaster, I was really scared of that. I used to be scared of swimming, things like that. Do you remember how you felt? You had an internal conflict. So your fears is an example of internal conflict. Happens inside your mind. Other conflicts are with people or things outside the character. External conflicts. Which of Omar's struggles are external? What do you think? Pause. The one with his brother and the one with the shark. One conflict is more physical than the other, but both are with forces outside himself. Okay, let's pause here for a second. So what are the two types of conflicts that a character can have in a story? Pause. Internal conflict and external conflict. Great. Second question. What is the difference between an internal conflict and an external conflict? Pause. So an internal conflict is a struggle that our character has within himself, like in his mind. And an external conflict is a struggle that our character has with people or things that are outside himself. Great! Let's go on. Other conflicts. Omar's conflict with his fear is the main conflict. But others in the story have conflicts too. Gomez and his father have a conflict. Can you find it on page 309? As a reminder, Gomez and his father had a conflict about how Gomez has to be more careful. And Gomez has a conflict with a clam. So that's when Gomez gets his hands stuck in a clam. But these are secondary conflicts, which mostly help to intensify the main conflict. They never concern the reader as much as the main conflict. For example, it would be kind of boring, maybe, if a book only had one problem, only one conflict, right? So think about like the story of Matilda. There were a lot of different conflicts. It wasn't just that Mrs. Trunchbull was part of the conflict. Matilda also had awful parents, right? And there was also a conflict where she actually got into Mrs. Trunchbull's house and they had to get out, and the way that Mrs. Trunchbull treats all the kids terribly. There are lots of different conflicts, but what it's trying to say here is that there's a difference between a main conflict, so it grabs the most attention, and then secondary conflicts are like secondary characters, not as intense. The need for conflict. Why do you think that every story has a conflict? Primarily, it makes a story a story. Think how different a spear for Omar would be if Omar had been given his spear at the beginning and were as good at fishing as Gomez. The unusual setting and the action of spearing fish would still be interesting, but without any conflict, the writing would be just informative or descriptive. That is, it would be perhaps a report or an essay. So that would be the difference. So pausing here. What do you think the author means here when he says that? It makes the story a story. What does that mean? Pause. Yeah, so what he's trying to say is that without a conflict, the story would not really be as exciting, and it would be more of like an essay, like an informative article. Okay, next page. To have a story, a narrative, there must be conflict. Narratives have beginnings and middles and ends. The beginning lets the reader see what the character wants. Can you find where Omar states his innermost desire on the second page of the story? Where does the author introduce Omar's desire to stop his brother seizing? The middle of the story presents the struggle. In Omar's story, the middle is the longest part. Do you think that's true of most stories? Why do you think that the middle tends to be longer in a story? What do you think? Pause here. Okay, well, it takes more time to show how a character responds to his problems than it does to just show that he has them. They need to write more about it. If the middle is too hurried or short, the story is not satisfying. It does not let us feel with the character or imagine how we might respond. The ending of a story is the resolution, the outcome, so what happens at the end. How a conflict turns out is most important. It gives the story its meaning. Take Omar's struggle with fear, for example. Suppose that Omar had not overcome his fear in time to save Gomez. A spear for Omar would then be a far different story, wouldn't it? Instead of teaching that fear can be mastered, the story would just suggest that fear will always be the master. When you read a story, find the character who most wants something. This is key. I would like you to underline this or highlight it. Helps you find the conflict. Again, I'm going to read it one more time. When you read a story, find the character who most wants something. Follow his struggle to the end and then ask, what does that ending make the story say? Great. So we're going to be practicing identifying internal and external conflicts. So remember, internal conflict happens inside the mind, such as Omar's fear of drowning. External happens with the characters and things that are outside the character, such as Omar's argument with his brother and the conflict with the shark. Cool. Go ahead and pause and complete page 127 first, and then we'll go over the answers together. Remember, when you're looking for these, to find the character who most wants something. That will be your big hint. All right, you can pause now. Fantastic, let's go over the answers. Struggles in stories are called conflicts. Internal conflict shows the character having a struggle inside himself. External shows that the character is having a struggle with people or things outside the character. Identify the type of conflict by writing internal or external in the blank. Derek befriends, that means he becomes friends with. Derek befriends a wounded coyote and raises it as a pet. When several spring lambs are found slaughtered by a wild animal, the ranchers accuse the coyote. Derek attempts and tries to protect his pet while trying to prove the pet's innocence. He's trying to protect his coyote, his pet, from harm. Would that be internal? Is it a battle going inside his mind, or does it have to do with outside forces? External. Very good. For weeks, Gary hasn't wanted to go to chapel or church. He avoids any talk of the Lord in his Christian school. He mopes around the house unhappily. Finally, one day in chapel, he can't stand it any longer. When the chapel speaker gives the invitation, Gary goes forward and is saved. What did you write here? So he's not actually having a conflict with anything outside himself, right? It's an internal conflict with himself about accepting the Lord as a savior. Miriam wants to try for editor of the school paper in April, but her lack of responsibility disturbs her parents. She's not very responsible. They talk with her about improving her work at home before taking on additional responsibility at school. Miriam tries to solve her problem by keeping charts of her jobs, their beginning and their completion. By April, Miriam has improved so much that her parents let her try for the editor's job. So what does Miriam want? She wants to become an editor, but the struggle here is that she's not very responsible. So that is a struggle inside herself, because you're not literally battling something outside, right? It's just the problem inside yourself. She's trying to improve internal. Emmanuel spends the summer studying survival skills at a special camp. The following autumn, he goes on a wilderness hunt with his father. When his father's injured in a freak accident, Emmanuel has to get him back to civilization where he can be treated. So his father is hurt. He needs to take care of his father. So this is external. He's having a struggle with people outside himself. Michelle capsizes her boat in rough seas and is marooned on a small island. So she's stuck in a small island. She must survive by living off the island until she's rescued. External, this is something that's happening outside herself. She has to survive outside using all the different tools, etc. Preston lives beside a lake. Though all his friends and his family are excellent swimmers, Preston's afraid of the water. His friends laugh at him, leaving him out of summer activities. He works diligently and overcomes his fear. Now he enjoys swimming with his friends. So fear, being afraid of something, just like Omar was scared of swimming. Internal conflict. Great job, guys. That's it for reading class. I hope this helped. I would like to challenge you to, as you read, do your reading, try to identify the internal and external conflict, and let me know through Google Classroom or YouTube or anything like that. I would love to hear about it. I'll see you soon in spelling class. Bye.